This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right, so I need to try to get the ball rolling with this as quick as possible. Got a gig I'm playing tonight, so I want to get this baby uploaded before mid-afternoon. At the rate I'm going, that ain't gonna happen. So we'll do some rapid-fire intros and get things going with the classic reviews. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report for anybody that is checking out the show for the first time. We're on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new shows and new episodes. I always encourage people to subscribe, comment, like the channel just to help me out in the algorithms. What little effect that may or may not have, I still don't really know. My numbers continue to fluctuate, depending on whether or not YouTube is in a good mood or not. I have been trying to cut back on the swearing. Doesn't always seem to help. For now, the best thing you can do to support the show is just give me a thumbs up and keep the watch time and the click-through rate up. Still don't really know what the whole click-through rate thing is, but I hear it helps generate attention for smaller channels. And there's plenty to watch and get into this one. So let's kick this bad boy off with the TBS Superstation program and try to get this shite off and running. Now, one thing I have not been doing lately is mentioning the cold opens for these studio shows. To be honest, most of them just really haven't been all that noteworthy. But I did jot down the location of where I believe this Barry Windham Mike Rotunda TV title match took place from. It was either a local high school boiler room or a bowling alley where they forgot to pay the electric bill. Times were tough, people. And this is Crockett Promotions in 1988 we're talking about. And for those wondering, why were Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda having a completely random TV title match for no apparent reason? The answer is, why not? Why not have a completely random TV title match with Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda? I mean, they're family after all. Can't brothers-in-law engage in conflict every now and then? Now, for the record, this match happened at the Cincinnati Gardens, a venue that I don't think I've heard mentioned before or since this moment. In addition to the room being lit like shit, oh my God, this ring. This ring looked like 2 eggs in a hanky. I don't know who set this thing up before the show, but you could not have gotten me to poke that thing with a 10-foot pole. Looked like it was about to cave in on itself. Thankfully, no one got hurt taking bumps on it. But I was afraid that thing was on the verge of collapse. But we caught a glimpse of the remaining moments of the Windham-Rotunda match. For the rest of the varsity club grabbed Windham and started choking him out with a coat hanger. And while they were trying to drag his body down the aisleway, Luger ran out from the other end and chased the heels off through the crowd. I like that in his efforts to run off the heels, he had to slide into the ring, then run across the ring, slide back out, and then give chase to everybody on the floor. Talk about going around your elbow to get to your wrist. But I mean, the Barry promo here at the studio was pretty good. He was very hush-toned. He was very stern. But he mentioned that what Rotunda did goes beyond trying to end somebody's wrestling career. And considering the familial relation, well, that about went out the window with what he did. The fact that he was the one that choked out Wyndham with a coat hanger, that's what continues to stick in Barry's craw. So he vows he will never allow Rotunda to get an opportunity like that again. And, yeah, like I said, really strong promo. Definitely one of the rare times we saw Barry in this form. You know, he's always relatively a very serious, down-to-earth guy. Here was a very dark side of Barry that we were not accustomed to. A really good start to the show. Immediately jumping right into the angles from out of the gate. And as we come back from our first commercial, we go to the booth for a Horseman promo. We actually didn't get a full-length match in this week until about 10 minutes into the show. A lot of promo material to kick things off. And, the big thing here was JJ talking about the Crockett Cup tournament, how the Horsemen plan on being ranked the number 1 seed, which you might remember from Jim Cornette's promo last week. You know, he was trying to solidify the Midnights as the ones who should earn that number 1 slot. And we know the Horsemen Midnights match was something they were teasing pretty early on in '88 before everything sort of fell apart later in the year once Tully left. But, I believe the seeds were planted here. They never mentioned the Midnights by name. But when they were referencing the seed placement, you think in the back of your head, huh? I guarantee Courtney was listening to that promo. And of course, Arn brought up Luger and Barry here and made some more Twin Towers references. He said, "It's very symbolic." To which I said, "It sure is, Arn." But he basically told Luger and Barry that they can talk a big game all they want, but if they keep on preaching about what they're going to do instead of actually doing it, it's going to start becoming a shit or get out the pot scenario. So they better figure out which team they want to be. Say it or do it. And the Horsemen know which ones they are. Then we go back to the ring for Shane Douglas versus Gene Ligon. What I deemed the longest 6-minute match in the history of mankind. I'm being somewhat facetious there. It was, it was more exciting than that Shane Douglas match the other week when he was teaming up with Ricky Santana. He was standing on the apron for half the fucking match. It was funny. You know, they're trying to give Douglas that pretty boy presentation here because, you know, he's youthful. He's got the blonde hair, good body, the whole 9 yards. So they're trying to give him the ladies' man gimmick, showing like various shots of all the young gals in the crowd. It would have maybe benefited if they tried to get shots of girls that did not look either confused or disinterested. I like the one girl that just kind of scoffed and turned her head away from the camera. She was not impressed by Shane Douglas's work. But they did some all right stuff together. Ligon took a comical bump in the corner at one point where Douglas did a running handspring onto the apron. Ligon just kind of ran sternum first into the turnbuckle and then fell backwards like he'd been shot out of a cannon. Of course, it just led to the near fall a few seconds later, so it was all for naught. But Douglas went with the belly-to-belly. And then he did a promo afterwards referencing Magnum P.I. Something tells me he meant T.A. But, Freudian slip. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Then he talked about the upcoming Crockett Cup, as well as the Clash of Champions at the end of March. somewhere in here he got sidetracked after a few girls yelled, "We love you, Shane." You could tell he was desperately trying to hold back from laughing. But, he was mainly just a giant billboard to promote the two big shows in March and April. Apparently he and Santana will be teaming up again, so anybody that thought that they've already dropped that makeshift pairing, oh, there's more to come. Unfortunately. But I at least got more out of that promo than I did this JJ Ric Flair promo after the break. This was the epitome of a guy talking for 8 minutes straight and saying little to nothing of value by the time it was over. Flair, I can't even begin to describe his train of thought. This was total spur of the moment, stream of consciousness freestyling. He made a bunch of obscure sports references from the local St. Louis and Louisville basketball teams. I know nothing about basketball, so I'm not even going to attempt to butcher some of the names he mentioned. Then he talked about the Clash of Champions in Greensboro, saying that Jim Crockett is dishing out a shit ton of money to make Flair the poster boy. Then he basically told Sting that they'll be facing off several more times before the Clash, but Flair vows that he will be the world champion before and after the Clash event. I believe that covered the bulk of the material he spoke. But it was damn near like 10 minutes to even get to the point. Probably because the guy was pilled out of his fucking mind and on the verge of having a heart attack. He looked like a red tomato by the time he was done talking here. Good Lord. Somebody get that guy a drink. Then we went to the ring for Mike Rotunda versus Ricky Santana, a World TV title bout, with Kevin Sullivan in his face guard at ringside. And from the minute they put that graphic up for this match, my immediate thought was, oh, for the love of God, please don't tell me this thing is about to go 20 minutes. Please. I do not need to see Mike Rotunda wrestle Ricky Santana for 20 goddamn minutes. So guess who I got to watch wrestle each other for 20 minutes? My luck. Now, in all fairness, it was not hideously awful. It was just kind of one of those long TV matches where they did about 15 minutes of standard wrestling. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of very paint-by-numbers stuff. And then they tried to cram in about 5 minutes worth of angles at the very end. They had Sullivan get involved at various points to try to distract Teddy Long and let Rotunda work his heat magic. But it wasn't up until the last few minutes where it started to pick up a little bit. Rotunda's in there working over Santana, and eventually out comes Barry Windham to ringside to counteract Sullivan's interference. Now, why Windham waited until the last 5 minutes to come out and help, I couldn't tell you. But the announcers are doing the countdown in the final few minutes. Rotunda's mostly in control. Windham's out there trying to fight off Sullivan. Finally, the bell sounds for the time limit draw. And as Barry gets in the ring to cover up for Ricky, the heels start ganging up on Barry. And of course, Barry's trying to fight back on Sullivan and give him some clean shots. Sullivan is not even selling it. I'm like, what are you doing, dude? Fucking sell for the guy. But it eventually ends with Barry fighting off everybody and laying out Rotunda and Steiner. There was a great shot during this brawl where Teddy Long is laid out in the middle of the ring face down. The heels go to Irish whip Barry off the ropes. So in order to avoid stepping on Teddy and trampling him to death, Barry basically has to tiptoe around this dead carcass so he can fire back and clothesline the heels. was like watching that TNA match years ago where they had the barbed wire Christmas tree hanging in the middle of the ring. It's like when guys would get thrown into the ropes, they had to basically break the fourth wall by running around the Christmas tree to avoid smacking into it. That's what Teddy Long was in this moment. He was the barbed wire Christmas tree from the glorious Russo era of TNA. That's not a compliment. But that was that. Match was fine. But the main story material came out of the last couple minutes once Barry got involved. You know, this was mainly about advancing the feud with him and the Varsity Club. And that took us to Big Dust. A ringside interview with David Crockett here. Looking as only the American Dream can. Completely unstylish in every conceivable way. But it works for him because he's Dusty. He covered a bit of ground here. First, he talked about the Clash of Champions, saying he and the Road Warriors are going to do battle against the Powers of Pain and Ivan Koloff in a Texas barbed wire match. A match that I remember quite vividly, as a matter of fact, and not for particularly good reasons. But I will not go too deep into that discussion yet. He also talked about his custom-made $2,000 cowboy boots. Made a reference to Baby Doll and Larry Zbyszko. Then we got one of those classic Dusty lines here that actually I believe Cody referenced on Raw not too long ago. The line of whining and dining with kings and queens, sleeping in alleys and dining on pumpkin beans. A phrase that we all live vicariously through in the year 2024. Yet it's also only a phrase that Dusty could probably get away with saying. And Cody. So that led us to a clip of Sting beating on Chance McQuaid at a local recent Sunday syndicated taping. Never in my life have I seen a job guy so confident to try to exchange fisticuffs with Sting. Yet still looked like a complete buffoon when it was over. To the shock of absolutely nobody, Stinger won with a scorpion in about 45 seconds. And that led us back to the interview podium with David Crockett and JC, where Mr. Cornette informs us that he's got some bad news. No, it's not that David Crockett tested positive for AIDS. For the record, yes. He actually said that on live TV. And David laughed. He did not try to deny it. I'm not judging. I'm just pointing out the obvious. He mentioned that the Midnights are out doing charity work this week, opening up a couple half houses for some crack whores who didn't want to go all the way. Again, not joking. He actually said that. And well, then he got his Crockett Cup and Clash of Champions plugs out of the way. Still insinuating that his boys will be the number one ranked seed. Elsewise, Corny will have his mother's attorneys on that lawsuit as quick as you can snap a finger. Then he told a bunch of the babyface teams to make sure they don't come at the Midnights like a head of cabbage. Elsewise, they'll make some coleslaw out of those human bodies. So no Midnights this week. That was pretty much the message I got out of it. And something about crack whores. This is a family show, by the way, people. Just want everybody to remember that. Then we had Barry Windham versus Gary Phelps. Barry did some moves and won with the lariat. That's literally all I have to say about it. Next. Baby Doll. Well, she came out to the interview desk, carrying some leopard print boots to make fun of Dusty's promo earlier. And they were, in fact, straight-up hooker boots. And Larry joined Baby Doll and called Dusty a child beater, basically saying that since Dusty admitted to being one on nationwide TV, there's only one thing left for the network to do. They have to pull Dusty from their program and never speak of him again. Man, that Larry Zbyszko. He was quite the prognosticator. He also talked about pollution and nuclear waste and something about how the American population will soon rot itself into oblivion or something. I have no idea what he was talking about. But as I referred to last time, it sounded exactly like something Ludwig Borga would have said in 1993 on Raw. Now that I'm rereading some of this was a very weird segment. I didn't even really put two and two together until I just read down my notes again. I also don't recall Dusty ever indicating anything about being a child abuser. But, it wouldn't be the first time something went completely over my head on these shows. And then we had the most disappointing squash of all time. It's Larry Zbyszko versus my new favorite job guy of all time, Randy Hogan. This fucking Randy Hogan. He's back in his bright blue ring trunks, trying to rip off Hulk Hogan's AWA look. Now, why was it disappointing? Well, you look at the two parties involved. I was expecting Larry to just toy with the guy and beat the shit out of him. I mean, a guy like Larry should have taken one look at him and think, well, I'm going to fuck with this guy. But no. Instead, it was a moderately tame Larry Zbyszko squash. It was funny trying to watch Randy fight back, but Larry just kept no-selling it. And, well, after a few minutes plus commercial, Larry taking his time working over Randy, finally he just put him away with a neck breaker and won. Sucks. I had high hopes for this one going in, and Larry let me down. He must have took pity on him. Or maybe he was just in a good mood. Who knows? And that took us to Lex Luger for a promo. And he basically talked in circles for at least 17 hours to maybe weeks. I mean, he just fucking rambled here. Just jumping from topic to topic, all over the place. I rewound some of this to try to write down more of what he was talking about, but eventually I just gave up trying. He's talking about the Crockett Cup, the Clash, Ric Flair, Sting, Barry Windham, the Horsemen, retiring from football, the fucking powers of pain and Paul Jones. I'm like, why the hell is Luger talking about Paul Jones? Have those guys ever been seen crossing each other on television? What does this have to do with anything? At one point, he took his shirt off to reveal that he was doused in an entire bottle of baby oil. And finally, he told Ric Flair that someday he and Luger are going to meet for the world title. This was by far the most unproductive promo I think I've ever heard. And I've heard some rambling Lex Luger promos in my day. But this right here, this might have taken the cake. Like, even replaying bits and pieces of the dialogue in my head, I still couldn't figure out what the hell this guy was talking about for half the promo. Just one giant run-on sentence. This guy was lucky he had abs. So we go from that completely unproductive segment to this next completely unproductive segment. Jive Tones versus Keith Steinborn and Ryan Wagner. Again, my notes are brief. I will read you exactly everything I wrote down and we will move on. Repulsively boring. Jive Tones wins with sloppy double Russian leg sweep. I promise you, everything that happened in the previous 5 minutes, it was nothing worth discussing in abundant detail. And that brought us to Kevin Sullivan and Rick Steiner versus Alan Martin and Steve Atkinson. There were about 5 or 6 blatant DQ spots that went completely unnoticed in this 3-minute match, including a blatant chair shot from Sullivan to one of the job guys on the floor. Teddy Long just looked at Sullivan, and I think his direct quote was, "What are you doing?" What are you doing? Good question, Teddy. Really getting to the root of the matter here. I also like the spot where Rick Steiner went to pick up Martin and then just dropped him on his head with a pancake pile driver. Just fucking killed him. Dropped the guy right on his neck. Didn't even care. And then a few minutes later, he legitimately killed him by dumping him on the back of his neck with a German suplex. And then Sullivan came in to pick the bones and get the pin. A mugging of great proportions here. The quintessential, I'm going to throw some dudes around and hope they don't die mentality. What was it JR said here? The varsity club graduated from the School of Hard Knocks. Word. And then we cut to ringside for an all-time horrible promo, which at the same time made it an all-time great promo. All right, so Kevin Sullivan's talking about God knows what. I mean, he's referencing a couple other promos we've already heard throughout the show, talking about Dusty's boots, Baby Doll's boots, yada yada. Then he tries to get the cameraman to film Mike Rotunda's tennis shoes. They were only managing to capture his calves. And then we get this epic botch. As Sullivan begins to reference the Crockett Cup, he says there will be 10 teams vowing to prove they're the best in the league. To which David Crockett interjects and casually tells Sullivan, there's actually 24 teams. To which Sullivan pauses. He glares a hole right through David. And he just keeps on talking about other shit. Until finally, Mike fucking Rotunda, of all people, has to jump in to save the day. He interrupts Sullivan and basically saves it by calling out Barry Windham. Trainwreck TV at its finest, folks. The moments we all live for as wrestling fans. Where we look back and see the best and worst of wrestling so we can have a good hearty laugh at it. Best example, Kevin Sullivan not remembering how many fucking teams were in the Crockett Cup. 10. Incredible. And that was followed with the return of the Road Warriors to tag action. First match seeing the Animal back since the eye injury last month. Came out sporting his signature spider face mask. And there was no ring rust from the Legion of Doom here. They plowed right through Bob Riddle and Rick Arassi just like that. And one of the most epic squash finishes of all time, where after they set up Riddle for the middle rope power slam from Animal, they're trying to pick up Rick Arassi for the Doomsday Device. This guy is so out to lunch. Animal kicks him in the gut. He has to grab Arassi by the back of the neck to pull him over because he legitimately tried to back away. Has to legitimately hoist this guy up onto his shoulders because Arassi's trying to fight out of it. Somehow they hit this Doomsday without killing him. These job guys, dude. I mean, there were some pretty rotten job guys that have been booked on these studio shows. Am I imagining things, or have they seemed to get progressively worse in the last 2 years? Remember when the fucking Malkies were all over this show? They weren't half bad compared to these losers. Tony Zane? God, that guy looks like Owen Hart compared to some of these idiots coming through the territory in late 87, early 88. God, they were so horrible. At least his follow-up promo made up for it. It was already funny enough listening to Animal try to cut a raging babyface promo while sounding like Darth Vader, talking about how Jim Crockett wouldn't let Animal wrestle unless he had protective gear on, per doctor's orders. And then finally, Hawk cuts him off mid-promo, calls Animal hydraulic hockey puck. Well, first he fucked up by calling David Crockett Tony Schiavone, basically joking that he's had his head rammed into the ring post one too many times. And then he talked about all the various job markets that people get into. Some people get into the snow removal industry. Some get into the garbage removal industry. Some even get into wart removal. So dermatology, I presume. And he indicated here that Hawk and Animal are now taking up practice of head removal, promising the people that they will see it live on March 27th in Greensboro when the Road Warriors remove the Powers of Pain's heads from their bodies. And the people will get to see it on TV for free. How great is that? No upcharge for a human beheading. Oh, David Crockett seemed to be enthused by it. I was more or less disturbed. But, maybe that's because I was still thinking of wart removal. Don't do drugs, kids. That's the lesson I got out of this. And if you are going to wear a hockey mask, make it look like Animals. Because that was a badass hockey mask. And that took us to the debut of the Super Destroyer on the Superstation, facing off with Tony Suber in one of the more bizarre segments we've seen on the Superstation in quite a while. Now, which version of the Super Destroyer we were talking about here, I couldn't tell you. It wasn't any of the famous ones we've seen throughout the territories over the years. This was so weird. Okay, remember how I've been talking about Tony Suber looking relatively good going up against a lot of the big names on this show? Remember when he was competitive with Tully and Arn the other week? How they were actually letting Suber get a little bit of offense in on him? Well, apparently they decided to give this guy the Bill Tab treatment. Now Tony Suber is racking up wins on TV. He actually won this. I was surprised. He and Destroyer had a very basic match. Destroyer worked him over for the heat. Kind of looked like they were just teasing the idea of Destroyer going over. And then at the very end, Suber catches Destroyer with a power slam off the ropes, and he cradles him for a 3 count. And in one of the more hilarious moments we've seen on TV this week, the announcers are desperately trying to get Suber to come back to the announce booth for comment. Suber bolts off to the locker room while David Crockett is screaming to the top of his lungs, "Tony! Tony!" And JR and Shivani are howling. You have never heard a man so eager to interview a job guy on this program. Then David Crockett trying to hunt down Tony Suber for comment after he won a match. It's a shame we didn't get the promo. I have no idea what the point of this was. But hey, Tony Suber won a match. Or Toby Sooner, or whatever his fucking name is. He now has a fan. And his name is David Crockett. The biggest mark for Tony Suber on this show. And you want to know what the funny part is? This will probably be the only time we ever see Tony Suber actually win a match. And then we had this iconic Paul Jones segment with the Powers of Pain. Paul's a little worried right now, given what we just saw from the Road Warriors a few minutes prior. He informs us that, well, he's not scared. He just doesn't know how to process the animal's comeback. He's either incredibly stupid or he's more of a man than Jones ever thought. He says when he sees all these billboards promoting snacking on danger and dining on death, he thinks back to that famous night in Greensboro when the Powers of Pain laid waste to the Road Warriors. And Paul will not be satisfied until the Road Warriors are decked from head to toe in nothing but iron casts and braces. And as for this barbed wire match in Greensboro, Paul Jones is not afraid to put his Powers of Pain in that environment. He just doesn't want their bodies to get scarred up like a bunch of animals. Of course. Because, the Warlord and the Barbarian, they're not animals after all. They're only human. Everybody knows a human barbarian. There's nothing animalistic about that. This was such an amazing heel promo. Paul's not afraid of the barbed wire. POP's not afraid of the barbed wire. He's just looking out for the best interest of his colleagues. Can't have him get bludgeoned in that razor-sharp wire. That's inhuman. Unsafe. Hazardous to one's health. I love this man. And then we have this relatively short, fun main event to go out on. It's Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, and Arn Anderson versus Rocky King, Trent Knight, and Mike Jackson. I don't even remember the last time Flair worked a match on the studio show in Atlanta. It's definitely been a hot minute. Pretty easy payday for him, though. Barely had to lift a finger in this one. It was a fun little showcase for the Horsemen. Pretty much swept the floor with these guys. Although they let the job guys get in a little bit of offense early on. But a lot of constant in and out tags from the Horsemen. Fresh bodies coming in all throughout the match. I did laugh at the one spot where Double A gave Trent a brainbuster DDT. And then as soon as he tagged in Tully, Trent's right back on his feet trying to fight back. I was like, really, dude? Couldn't bother to sell the implant DDT? But Flair ultimately got the win with a figure 4. No sweat for these guys. It's all about building up that horseman courage as they go into the next few events. Flair's got that date with the Stinger on the 27th. Got to give him a little bit of a confidence boost. And at the same time, you got Tully and Arn gearing up for the Crockett Cup in April. So everybody's in game mode right now with the Horsemen. Yeah, no complaints here. Again, very short and sweet to the point. But it was a nice little ego booster for the heels here. And it wrapped up a relatively fun studio program for the week. Yeah, nothing outrageously groundbreaking in terms of heavy angles or anything. But they got the two big events they're pushing right now. Trying to get the promotion out of the slump period we've been in since January. And I will say, they are at least trying to invigorate a little bit more interest with the product. The Bash Tour is still a ways out, so they're trying to fill the gaps with the Crockett Cup and the Clash of Champions as those must-see events. Give it all the promotion they can. And we are definitely going to do a Clash of Champions review when we get to the final week in March. Don't worry, I had that blocked out as a special segment for the Friday show. And I do plan on making that an annual thing as we advance along in the timeline. Like even the lesser known, lesser important Clash events, I'll probably still calculate those into the review series. And, we'll still do the review and recaps of those events to stay in the timeline of the Retro series. The Crockett Cup tournament, I probably won't do the same for. I think last year I mainly talked about the highs of the show and only covered a few of the top matches in the final brackets. But, there's no way I'm going to review all 24 matches, including the prelims. I'm not trying to do a 3-hour recap of the 1988 Crockett Cup. In my younger years, perhaps. But, I got too much going on to dedicate that much time to a podcast. But those will be the shows to keep on your radar going forward, because they will be factored into our review series. For now, we can flip the page to Midsouth talk. This was the March 5th, 1983 episode. And while it was a shorter episode than normal, runtime for this one was just shy of around 40 minutes. Didn't mean there wasn't anything to talk about. First thing we have to talk about right out of the gate, Boyd Pierce's apparel for this episode. Sporting his tomato soup-colored coat and tie. It was a sight to behold. I'm sure Bill Watts had many thoughts running through his head at the time. But God love him, he kept a straight face, powered through the opening notes here, didn't bat an eyelash at it. And the two big bullet points he addressed here were the return of Mr. Olympia to this week's television, as well as tying it in with the upcoming North American title tournament that they're going to be hosting in New Orleans on the 21st. Among many individuals that have already thrown their name into the hat, Olympia is another one of those names. The other thing Watts covered here, before their first VTR pitch, he talked about the Junkyard Dog visiting a local public school in the area, doing some PR for the Midsouth area, saying the dog found time in his busy schedule to go down and visit with the kids, have themselves a good old-fashioned Junkyard Dog Day, which sounded like a fucking ball of a time. I wish my school had JYD Day. I can only imagine what the parents were thinking when they thought, Junkyard Day. Probably thinking a legit pro wrestler was taking an entire class of kids to a local junkyard to hang out and play. But no, he was just there to visit and spread the good news of public education. This probably doesn't register the same way in 2024 as it did back in the mid-'80s. Times are much different now. So now it's time to go back in the time machine for a minute. We're obviously anticipating the return of Mr. Olympia this week. So it's important to recall how we even got to this point where Olympia was written off of TV to begin with. And it all goes back to December 18th of last year, right during the height of the Mr. Wrestling 2 Kamala Skandar Akbar feud, where Wrestling 2 believed that Akbar was at the helm of all the slander and defamation of his property, leaving him notes, ripping up his masks, sending him creepy-looking dolls with Wrestling 2 masks on. And it was on that same night where Wrestling 2 found himself in the ring alone with General Akbar, trying to command answers out of him. But it was a setup so Kamala could come out and lay out Wrestling 2. And of course you're all asking, well, okay, that's great and all, but what the hell does that have to do with Mr. Olympia? Well, the answer is that during that same episode, Wrestling 2 was scheduled to come out and team up with Stagger Lee to take on the Rat Pack for the Midsouth tag belts. But since Kamala already laid out 2, it rendered him unable to compete later on. So Olympia voluntarily stepped in and took Wrestling 2's place in that tag match. The match that was also a loser of the fall leaves Mid-South stipulation. So fast forward to the end. Guess who took the fall? And we have not seen or heard from Mr. Olympia since that point. Up to the point he was coming back this week. Complete silence. Not a word. And all signs seem to indicate that it was going to be BAU. Business as usual. Well, the plot thickens. Before we expand on the Mr. Olympia subject, let's briefly look over this Black Ninja versus Jerry Caldwell match. The match where we were informed that Nagasaki's hairstyle was not, in fact, the result of a receding hairline. Rather, it was ceremonial. Indeed, I'll bet. And y'all remember when I talked about how Kendo Nagasaki's promo package was leaps and bounds better than his actual debut? You know, when he got in the ring and actually worked. Well, I think I'm starting to be vindicated in that opinion. My notes for this consist of the following 2 bullet points. Lots of kicks and chops from the Black Ninja. Finishes him going for a thrust kick on Caldwell and losing his balance in the process. They've also now fully ditched the motorcycle. So instead of Nagasaki being a badass motorcycle riding ninja from the Orient, he is now just generic mixed martial arts Japanese gimmick from the Orient. Supremely less cool. And then we had Ted DiBiase versus Ron Ellis, which was kind of just a quick way to give DiBiase a win. Can't remember who the announcer was that filled in for Reeser Bowden this week. Forgot to write his name down. He was pretty horrible. This was also short and not very good. Ellis somehow managed to nearly fuck up a back body drop. That's like week 1 training in wrestling school. Probably a good thing it didn't get too much time before DiBiase went over with the figure 4. Bill Watts did make a comment here where he said, I don't know where Grizzly Smith finds a lot of these local job guys. To which I said, Watts should have seen these fucking studio jobbers from the NWA Crockett shows in the mid to late 80s. Holy Christ. I mean, they make Ron Ellis look like fucking Bret Hart. And then following that, we had Kelly Kiniski and Ron Kessler versus Mr. Wrestling 2 and Tiger Conway Jr. Tiger Conway's big opportunity to shine here after being all over like 75% of last week's program with the top guys. Oh, now they're giving him a platform, going out there to team with Wrestling 2. I'll talk about the finish in a sec because it is fucking ironically horrible. I'm almost cracking myself up now just thinking about it. I did note, though, this was the segment where Watts was rapidly name-dropping a bunch of newcomers to the Mid-South area, including a couple impending debuts from King Kong Bundy and Hacksaw Bruce Reed. Not Butch Reed, but Bruce Reed. Looking forward to those debuts. So the finish of this match. Oh my God, the finish to this match. I don't even know what the hell happened here. So Kessler tags in, and one of the first spots he does with Wrestling 2, Wrestling 2 throws him into the ropes for a simple Irish whip. Nothing fancy, nothing colorful. A basic Irish whip into the ropes. A move that has been seen and done since the beginning of time. When dinosaurs were patrolling the earth, this move was invented. Kessler fucked it up. He runs into the ropes, somehow tangles himself up between the middle and top rope, then he bumbles himself into Wrestling 2, who just gives him a punch to the gut. And that wasn't even the worst part. Because then Tiger Conway tags in, and I can't even remember. They do a near fall right as Wrestling 2 comes in to cut off Kiniski from breaking up the pin. He gives him a running knee lift. At which point, time completely freezes as Tiger Conway Jr. and Ron Kessler proceed to fuck up everything they tried. This Ron Kessler, he's just sandbagging the shit out of Tiger Conway, not cooperating with him at all. Conway goes for not one, but 2 consecutive body slams. Kessler sandbagged him on both. Refused to go up for him. Conway literally had to pick this fat ass up and slam him down to earth. Like, you could see Conway standing over him, visibly pissed off. Probably wanted to ghetto stomp his face into oblivion. And then they botch the finish, where Conway goes to try to hook Kessler for a modified fisherman suplex, basically where he grapevines the arm and then flips him over his shoulder. And they fucked that up. It was amazing. It was a legitimate 45-second Botchamania highlight reel where the entire thing was that series of spots. Absolutely nothing went right at the end of this match. This Ron Kessler, he may be the worst job guy I've ever seen. And I know I'm prone to hyperbole every now and then. Guilty as charged. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say this guy was the worst jobber I have ever seen. Until I get visual confirmation that there is somebody worse than Ron fucking Kessler, I refuse to buy it. I watched that whole sequence back at least 15 times, dying of laughter the whole way through. I felt so bad for Tiger Conway Jr. here. His one opportunity to break out of his shell and become a huge star. And he's wrestling Ron Kessler in the worst Mid-South match of all time. God, Wrestling 2 probably standing on the apron, shaking his head. Thinking, what the fuck is happening right now? You have to try to find a clip of this if you've never seen it. You won't be disappointed. I promise. It's about 24 minutes into the March 5th episode. The literal definition of watching a monkey try to boink a football. Train wreck level awful. But it was so great. So on that note, we finally had the return of Mr. Olympia. And he had his hands full this week, taking on Matt Bourne. And as you could probably imagine, Olympia was all business. You could see the fury in his mask. Some really good stuff here, though. Very fast-paced, very exciting. Olympia came out of the gate fighting. Some great early chain spots with Bourne here. Good stuff with Bourne working over Olympia's back, trying to prevent him from using the body slam. And eventually you get DiBiase come out to scout. And that leads to the finish where Olympia's trying to fire up and make his comeback. But he gets tripped up in the ropes for a blatant DQ call. So while Bourne and DiBiase are putting the boots to Olympia, Olympia ends up making his own comeback on the heels. Gets himself a visual pin on Bourne after dropping an elbow over the chest. And then Ricky Ferrara is like, fuck it. Mr. Olympia's already won by DQ. May as well just count the finish while he's down there. So it is, by all accounts, a relative triumphant return for Mr. Olympia. Gets himself a bit of sweet revenge on the heels that ousted him from Midsouth for 90 days. All seems right with the world. But is it really that simple? No, that's the question. And from there, we had a fun little standby match to go out on this week. Tim Horner versus Marty Lundy. Two future big names by their own right. I guess if I wanted to be a dick, I could say one future big name and a relatively passable upper mid-carder. But it was hard-hitting. Pretty much a sprint from bell to bell. It's amazing, dude. Every time I see a Marty Lundy match in Mid-South, even for the short span we've been doing these reviews, his matches get progressively better. You actually see the improvement with him week by week. As he gets more comfortable and learns timing and pacing, learning how to be an effective heel and be confident with his movements. He's already got the psychology down. And he's only been active in the business at this point for maybe a little over a year. Can't remember, when did he start wrestling? Was it early 82? In 1983, you look at a match like this and you don't think of it as any more than an underneath match to put on television. Fast forward a couple years from this point, this would have been a great curtain jerker for any pay-per-view. I'd say you could even put this in the middle of a pay-per-view card and it would still be perfectly suited. With these two names. And even though we didn't get a finish, I don't think it was needed. Kind of gives you that chance to wonder what would reasonably happen if these guys went face-to-face in 1983. Who would win? Naturally, my money's always going to go to Double A. But yeah, for 5 minutes, very good action. Now, the announcers used it as card setup for next week's program and make a couple brief announcements. But it was a good way to go out. Again, a shorter episode than normal, but they managed to pack a lot of stuff in here. The big thing was obviously the Mr. Olympia return. But again, it's not as clear-cut as what we're being led to believe. They didn't shoot an angle with him or anything, but it's funny. Even as I watch the return here, I'm like, something's not right. Yeah, he got a modicum of revenge on the Rat Pack, but surely there's more to the puzzle than what's being currently revealed, right? Well, stay tuned. So, world class. What can we say about world class this week? More of the same? A show that existed? I mean, I was even trying to find small things to poke at. It really didn't give me a whole lot to work with, if I'm being honest. It's not like Crockett TV where there's always something glorious to vent about for 45 minutes. Now, there is a lot I could say about the one-man gang's apparel for this week. But, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Speaking of the Handsome Devil, the open was OMG versus Jack Victory. Gang was billed at 469 pounds, even though the graphic clearly said 450. But I guess that's a thing the ring announcers did back in the day. Over-exaggerating the weight of the talent by a good 15 to 20 pounds. Try to make them look bulkier than they really were. It's probably something that would benefit today's product. Especially with a lot of these young chaps I see coming through the system today. Where everyone looks like they're no more than $150. Everyone's on that Spike Dudley diet. But it was a pretty prototypical one-man gang squash. Meaning it was a 5-minute squash that could have easily been condensed down to about 2. Gang just kind of beat on Victory for a while very methodically until giving him a hammerlock body slam onto his left arm. And then giving him a body splash while his arm was still tucked underneath his back. So not only was his sternum cracked, but his left arm was also very numb after this bout was over. Again, not a whole lot to say about it. Gang's been a very interesting newcomer to the Dallas area. Like, it's weird. He came in with all this fanfare and all this hype. Like, Gary Hart basically billing him as the big bodyguard protector for Chris Adams. Had this new menacing look to him that we never saw prior to him showing up in Dallas. And ever since he's come in, he's been very sporadic with appearances. And he really hasn't done much of anything aside from a few squashes and a handful of small angles with the Von Erichs. It's been a very tame run thus far. I don't remember if that ever picks up or if he just kind of works the subordinate role here and then buys his time until he goes back to Midsouth later on. And eventually the WWF in 87. Where they repackaged him as Akeem and worked their WWF magic of neutering a once great personality from the territory days. So following that, we had a nice little blast from the past, showing a relay of the Midnight's Fantastics history, in addition to a few clips of the Dallas matches we've already seen between them. They also aired some Mid-South footage, specifically the contract signing angle they did in 84 after Cornette had gotten his head shaved and he was wearing the mask over his head. Can't wait till we review some of that classic stuff in a couple years. But it was awesome. You got Hercules Hernandez out on the floor as the bodyguard for the group. Cornette and Grizzly are exchanging words. And right as the Fantastics finish signing up the paperwork, you get Dennis Condrey throwing the powder in their faces. Bobby Eaton goes to waffle them both with a chair across the head. They end up doing the blade jobs here, but we never saw that before they cut the footage. Just a nice little appetizer of some stuff that we're going to be covering on Midsouth programming in a couple years, once the Midnights make their way into the territory. I talk about it all the time, man, but this is where the crossover stuff is always cool. It does play spoiler a little bit with all the Midsouth content, but it also doesn't give enough away to where it outright ruins the timeline we're working through right now, but keep that moment on your radar. And that was all mainly to set up the Midnights match with Johnny Mantell and Brian Adias. Also including a special appearance from Sweet Brown Sugar, who I believe we've also seen make a few showings in Dallas. But he's another name that's sort of fallen off the map in recent months. I seem to remember they had something going on with him and the PYTs when they were still around. But all that kind of got unceremoniously dropped. Frankly, I don't even remember if we got a payoff to that feud. If we did, I don't remember it ever happening. And you'll be happy to know his return here consisted of Mark Lorenz giving him a quick plug. And then he left. He just walked to the back and that was it. No promo. Nothing. So why he was out there? I have no idea. Perhaps to reacquaint the audience? In case people forgot? In any case, I had two streams of thought running through my head while this was going on. The first was me noticing the scroll bar of just how fucking long the match was, which prompted me to think the match was going to a 20-minute draw. And that brings me to my second thought. Well, of course, Johnny Mantell's involved, so obviously there's not going to be a finish. That's not how Ken Mantell books. If Johnny's involved, of course he's not doing the job, brother. Well, color me pink. Boy howdy, wouldn't you know it. I was blown away. But they did it. They actually had Johnny do the job. Didn't ever think that was humanly possible for something like that to occur. So before I talk about all the chaos at the end, let me quickly read you a summation of everything I wrote down prior to the four-way spot and Corny's interference. This is verbatim. Match is taking forever. Holy shit, this babyface offense. Will the Midnights ever get the heat? Oh wait, they just cut off Adias. Never mind, babyfaces are back in control again. Fuck this match. That was every single bit of note-taking I did for this. Let me assure you, I am not missing a thing. Lorenz did not timestamp this at the end. I'm pretty sure if he said this match went an hour, I'd believe him. It was excruciatingly long and dull. I mean, I watched Mantell work over Condrey and a hammerlock on the mat for at least 20 minutes. And you know, there's always something to be said for milking build-ups, taking your time with drawing out the bigger moments, give people that anticipation factor. When you have a match where half the fucking thing is guy holds another guy in a stationary armbar, well, now I understand why the Marks have such a loathing for headlock spots in wrestling. I mean, there was virtually zero heat for this. Like the minimal amount of time Condrey and Neen were able to work over the baby faces, Barely lasted like 2 minutes before they got cut off again. Then they eventually do the four-way spot where, Rick Hazard's trying to separate Condrey and Adias so Corny can swoop in and give Mantell the racket shot to the back of the head. Eden winds up pinning him. I was like, we waited an hour and a half for that? Fuck, dude. Just lifeless. Lifeless TV match. Like, I guarantee if Cornette went back and saw this again, he'd have fallen asleep at the midway mark. Guaranteed. I don't even think Corny would defend this one. And I wouldn't blame him. It's not like they were working with the Rock and Roll Express or the Fantastics. It's fucking Johnny Mantell and Brian Adias. I want to know what Brain Trust decided. Let's give it 15 plus minutes. Got to cock block that idiot in a heartbeat. So yeah, that was extraordinarily long and uninteresting. The right team won. Just took a day and a half to get there. And the Midnights are still the current regional tag team champions, by the way. Remember that. Top heel team in the territory. And they needed help from their manager to beat a makeshift underneath babyface team after 15 minutes where they got their asses kicked the whole time. Unbelievable. So that brought us to our TV main event. Cornette was back out to manage Rip Oliver as he was going up against Kerry Von Erich. Sunshine also made sure to let us know that she was going to accompany Gary at ringside here so that we could all stare at her lovely face the whole time. I mean, to make sure Corny doesn't get involved. Or something like that. It is still kind of cool seeing the progression of Rip Oliver in the Dallas area. Like, he kind of went from being a run-of-the-mill mid-carder to an upper mid-card talent pretty quickly. All it took was him running Billy Jack out of the area. All of a sudden, he's the second biggest monster heel on the roster behind Gang. Cornette was great here with his bantering. At one point, he called Sunshine a hussy, which Bill Mercer commented on by going, well, that's certainly not a nice thing to say, especially if you know what the term hussy means. Thank you, Bill. Really needed that clarification. Where does the term hussy derive from? Please inform me. So the match was what it was. Pretty standard carry match. People were chanting for the Claw at various points, so, they were definitely into it. It's pretty steadily back and forth until they do the ref bump with Bronco toward the end, setting up interference from JC, who teased he was going to use the racket on Kerry. But as Kerry stalked him in the corner, Bronco threw the match out while Rip tried to jump Kerry from behind. Of course, that ultimately backfired, and Kerry threw a punch to Rip to send him packing. So Kerry wins via DQ. Not really all that surprising. The only other thing I noted here was Sunshine's comment during her promo at the beginning where she said she was going to be bringing in somebody to help her clean up. Never specified anything beyond that. But Mercer drew attention to it several times on commentary. So that'll be the next thing to look forward to as we move along in the world-class book series. But yeah, solid match. Good to see Rip main eventing Dallas TV against some top guys. A lot of that roster rotation is starting to fall into place right about now. But it's really hard to call this episode anything other than unspectacular. Like that middle match with the Midnights going up against Mantell and Adias, that was like slow burn torture at points. And just nothing in the realm of interesting stuff to talk about, even for a Midnights match. And that was the quintessential version of Bobby and Dennis just going through the motions. Now, it did set up the teaser for next week's Midnights and Fantastics match. So we will, in fact, be seeing round 3, which should be a lot of fun. But that little enhancement match didn't really stoke the fire to see the rubber match. It did make me want to kick Johnny Mantell down a flight of stairs for being one of the most undeserving, overpushed guys on the roster. But I don't want to start any drama or anything. You know, for all the 5 Johnny Mantell fans in existence. Wouldn't want to rub you the wrong way or anything. But I'm shot. So I'm going to wrap this baby up right now. As always, make sure you guys come back to check out the podcast every week on either YouTube or Rumble. We will be reconvening this coming Monday for the Retro Raw, Retro NXT, and SmackDown reviews. And like I said, it's pretty much smooth sailing until WrestleMania season. I mean, we're in WrestleMania season, but we're still about a month out from when all the chaos picks up. So stay tuned for all that. We'll definitely be doing some modification for the weekend program. But thanks everybody for watching, and I will catch you guys this coming Monday. Take care. Peace.